Melissa Louise Grimley was born on April 21, 1971, to Barbara and Ted Grimley. They lived in Lugano, a modest Sydney suburb of about 5,000 inhabitants. Melissa's childhood was comfortable. Her father worked for an insurance company and her mother was a physiotherapist. The family belonged to the middle class, and her parents were actively involved in charity work at the local Lions Club, trying to support their community. Melissa was an ordinary, unremarkable girl. She did not shine in her studies, but she was fond of fashion from an early age. After high school, she enrolled in secretarial and business courses at Patrick College in Sydney. She got her first job as an administrator in the investment department of the National Road Association. Melissa was very interested in finance. One evening in 1992, when she decided to relax in a bar after a busy work week, she met an attractive man. After drinking too much, Melissa fell in love. But a few months later, she woke up penniless. The man had maxed out her credit cards and stolen many valuable items from her home. Melissa felt devastated, but she learned an important lesson. Money and trust in the wrong hands can be easily used for evil. However, she did not use this knowledge to benefit others. In 1998, the ambitious Melissa got a job as an office administrator at the Sydney branch of an investment bank. Having access to large sums of money, she did not behave any better than her cheating lover, despite her bitter experience with him. 6 months later, it turned out that Melissa had stolen $2,000 from the company's accounts by forging the manager's signature on several checks. Upon learning of this, the bank's management decided not to disclose the incident. Instead of a police investigation, she was allowed to resign at will. Moreover, she was not even charged with the stolen money, as the amount was deemed too small for a public scandal. To distract herself from her dismissal, Melissa focused on her personal life. She met a British man, Tony Caddick, and married him in April 2000. Melissa also took up weight loss and fitness by hiring a personal trainer. Through him, she met various clients, including a respected financial advisor. He was a top executive in a currency trading and finance firm that needed a new office manager. Melissa, of course, jumped at the chance and quickly became friends with him. Soon after, he hired her to join his team. Working hard in her new position, Melissa excelled. She quickly figured out which risks were worth taking and which were not. By 2002, she had saved enough money to invest $750,000 in the firm and take a 25% stake in it. Melissa's achievements were so impressive that she was featured on the cover of the Independent Financial Advisor, an industry publication, with the headline, "Good Choices, Best Practices in Financial Planning in Australia." In the magazine, Melissa warned readers against pyramid schemes and various scams, advising them to check the licenses, qualifications, and ethical standards of financial advisors. This sound advice was later tinged with irony. Within a year, Melissa was bored with her constructive role and wanted to expand her investments into real estate and the stock market. However, her employer had strict rules and refused to make concessions. After a particularly heated argument, Melissa left the firm in 2004, taking her $750,000. The sudden change in circumstances prompted Melissa and her husband Tony to move to England, where he lived before moving to Australia. In the summer of 2006, thanks to Melissa's previous financial success, they were already living in a beautiful house in Essex, northeast of London. Tony had successfully completed his law degree and landed a prestigious job. At the same time, the couple had a son. It would seem that the family had reached the pinnacle of prosperity. But neither the move to a new country, nor the change in lifestyle, nor even the joy of motherhood satisfied Melissa. While Tony spent many hours commuting to work in London, she was often left alone in the house. Melissa could have found a job, but instead she started cheating on her husband. A few months later, Tony found out that she was having an affair with her longtime friend, Sydney-based personal hairdresser Anthony Coletti. Melissa was secretly siphoning off the family money, flying with her lover to European cities, allegedly to attend financial conferences. Tony tried to sort things out, but instead of apologizing, Melissa got angry and blamed him for everything. The quarrel almost turned into a fight, so Tony decided to go to his parents' house for a few days, leaving his wife and son at home. But when he returned a few days later, Melissa, along with the child, most of the furniture, and all the money they had together had disappeared. Melissa ruthlessly robbed Tony, selling off their furniture and clothes and fleeing with their son back to Sydney. When she returned home in January 2012, she launched a campaign to vilify her husband. She called him a traitor, a pathological liar, an abusive person, and a negligent father, although these accusations remained largely unproven. Shortly after returning to Australia in January 2012, Melissa got together with a new partner, Anthony Caddick. She also took over her and Tony's real estate in England and sold it for about $1.3 million. With this money, Melissa began to live large. She bought a luxurious 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom house in the Rose Bay neighborhood. It was there that her pyramid scheme officially started. Throughout her life, Melissa had been striving for big money, but her financial transactions often ended badly. The early deception of her insidious lover taught her a cunning lesson. Money and trust in the wrong hands can be easily used for malicious purposes. From forging signatures on checks to driving her own husband into poverty, Melissa quickly learned these practices. She ruthlessly exploited others in her pursuit of profit, but she quickly grew bored with the routine. Increasingly, Melissa thought about how to achieve her ambitions, and a grand scam was brewing in her mind. It wasn't a new idea. She had been harboring it for a long time, but hadn't put it into action yet. By then, Melissa was already quite wealthy, but she wasn't going to stop. The thought of defrauding just a few people seemed petty to her. Instead, she developed a complex strategy designed to defraud an army of investors. In 2012, Melissa began implementing her large-scale scam. Ironically, she ignored her own advice from the cover of the magazine about checking financial advisors' licenses. Melissa began to pose as a financial advisor to friends and family, promising that investments in her fund would generate substantial legitimate returns. In fact, she had neither the appropriate accreditation nor experience. After receiving money from investors, Melissa created fake screenshots of trading accounts and sent out fake monthly reports of allegedly sky-high returns of 10%, 20%, and even 30%. These high-class fakes built up investor confidence. They either increased investments or brought Melissa new clients. Her bank account grew rapidly from thousands to millions of dollars. She defrauded friends, former colleagues, a personal trainer, relatives, and even her own parents. Melissa's spending became more and more audacious and excessive. She carelessly spent other people's money on luxury cars, designer clothes, art, and jewelry. For example, she spent more than $48,000 on Chanel products, $275,000 on foreign travel, $229,000 in Dior boutiques, and more than $25,000 on protein shakes. All of this outrageously expensive lifestyle was financed by her circle of friends and family, who did not even realize it. To create an atmosphere of exclusivity around her business, Melissa lied to potential investors that her roster was full. But then she would lure them in with offers of allegedly newly vacant seats if they paid a quick deposit. In 2014, Melissa purchased a luxury estate on Orlando Road for over $6 million. This fashionable mansion had stunning views of the Sydney Harbor Bridge, spacious living rooms, a swimming pool, and a large dining room with a panoramic view of the city. In 2016, she presented her husband, Anthony Caddick, with a $390,000 Audi R8 with the license plate of his music label. Anthony was an amateur DJ and musician. Melissa herself also owned several expensive cars. Since 2009, she has traveled 25 times abroad, from Aspen ski resorts to remote islands in the Pacific Ocean. All of this was financed by her circle of friends and family. Melissa's parents even sold their house in South Sydney and entrusted their daughter with the proceeds to buy an apartment in Edgecliff on the condition that she would have the right to live there for life. Instead, Melissa registered the apartment in her name only and spent the money on a $590,000 diamond and other whimsical items. Not only did Melissa fraudulently acquire a huge fortune, but every year she spent millions to satisfy her own material whims. Vacations in luxury hotels, traveling by private jet, whatever her heart desired. This went on for 8 years, and all this time Melissa's pyramid scheme remained unpunished. She successfully ran a Ponzi scheme, covering payments to old investors with new ones. Melissa earned about $30 million by cheating. However, she was well aware that nothing lasts forever. She just chose to ignore it. The foundation of Melissa's fraud began to crack back in 2019, when the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC, received a signal that Caddick was working as an unlicensed financial advisor. At first, this did not cause an immediate reaction, but by June 2020, the case did attract the attention of investigators. It turned out that Melissa did not have an Australian financial services license. In addition, she had illegally used the documents of a longtime colleague and friend, adding her own name to them. This discovery alarmed the commission, because by that time, Caddick had already swindled about $30 million from clients. So ASIC put Melissa under close surveillance. For several months, they meticulously documented her every transaction. This thorough investigation eventually provided irrefutable evidence of fraud. On November 10, 2020, the regulator froze Melissa's assets and confiscated her passport. The next day, her luxury estate worth more than $6 million was searched by police. During the raid, Caddick was visibly disturbed. Her behavior showed that she was aware of the precariousness of her situation. Her life of luxury had come to an end. She faced a long prison sentence for the seriousness of her crimes. It is therefore not surprising that early the next morning after the search and seizure of her assets, Melissa disappeared without a trace. On the morning of November 12, 2020, before dawn, Melissa quietly woke up, put on a tracksuit, and slipped out of the room while Anthony was sleeping. She put on her sneakers and headed for the exit. When the door clicked softly, her 14-year-old son heard it. That was the last moment Melissa was seen alive. Anthony didn't report his wife's disappearance to the police until 11:30 the next morning, 30 hours later. The news prompted detectives to launch an intensive investigation. Given Melissa's financial fraud exposed the day before, investigators considered her sudden disappearance extremely suspicious. ASIC, which had already been closely scrutinizing her fraudulent schemes, viewed this démarche as an attempt to avoid punishment. A week passed without a single trace. The family of the missing woman was terribly worried. They contacted her through the media, begging her to give them a sign that she was okay. Everyone realized that the situation was serious. Melissa had defrauded not just anybody for millions of dollars, but really influential people, and her own friends and relatives as well. All of them knew how brazenly she had squandered their investments and where she lived. The question was whether Melissa had disappeared of her own free will, or whether her fate was payback at the hands of an angry investor. Investigators began by checking Melissa's phone records. After her disappearance, her cell phone was silent. No calls, no messages, nothing. She left her phone and keys at home. Her bank accounts were also frozen. Then the police began to study the surveillance footage from the Caddick's house. But even there, the woman was not caught on camera. Despite their best efforts, no camera in the neighborhood had captured Melissa that morning. The conclusion was that if she did leave the neighborhood, it was probably in someone else's car. Another scenario that the cops considered was what if Melissa hadn't left the neighborhood and was just hiding somewhere. But this version seemed unlikely. The Caddick estate is located in the attractive Dover Heights neighborhood, whose name fully justifies itself. To the west of it stretches the panorama of Sydney, and to the east, steep cliffs plunge into the ocean. Those cliffs are only about 300 meters from Orlando Road, where Melissa lived. So in desperation, some speculated that the con artist could have jumped off the cliff into the waves. However, for Anthony and Melissa's family, this version seemed absurd. She adored her son and would never have left him, even if she had faced prison. Although the charges were serious, Melissa could have gotten off with a short prison sentence or a large fine. Anthony argued that his wife would not have done that. Therefore, investigators, in the absence of any evidence or a body, also rejected the suicide version. The police expanded the search to the entire territory of Australia. But with her passport confiscated, Melissa could not legally travel abroad. Due to the specifics of the case, the news of Caddick's mysterious disappearance spread like wildfire. At first, it was discussed by all the residents of Dover Heights, then Sydney, and then the whole country. Eyewitnesses began to report seeing Melissa in different parts of Australia, Brisbane, Melbourne, and even in distant Darwin. Now she was recognized by millions. It seemed that the scammer had nowhere to go. Investigators hoped that she would eventually turn herself in. Until 101 days after she disappeared, the ocean brought a gruesome discovery to the shore. On February 21st, 2021, two people were picking up trash on Bjornda Beach, 400 kilometers south of Caddick's home. From a distance, they noticed a gray sneaker sticking out of the sand. When they got closer, they saw a horrifying sight, a human foot inside. The discovery was spreading a disgusting stench, and the contents looked rotten and yellowed. The sneaker had obviously washed up on the shore just a few hours ago. The size and model matched Melissa's favorite shoes. While forensic scientists tested the DNA, oceanographers analyzed the currents in the Tasman Sea to understand how the severed foot ended up on a beach hundreds of kilometers from Sydney. A week later, genetic testing confirmed that the DNA from the foot was identical to samples taken from Melissa's toothbrush. Family members also identified the missing woman's sneakers. Despite this ominous evidence of Melissa's death, the public did not believe she was dead. Many people believe the incident was a clever trick to avoid a trial. Her husband, relatives, and friends all unanimously stated that Caddick would not commit suicide. In addition, his foot was too decomposed to swim in the ocean for all 3 months. Some even suggested that Melissa had cut off her own foot and thrown it on the beach to cover her tracks. These theories are still the subject of heated debate. On the other hand, in the last days before her disappearance, Caddick found herself in a hopeless situation. Arrest would mean the loss of freedom, wealth, connections, and family. Could despair have pushed her to take the fatal step off that cliff? It is unlikely that we will ever know. But despite the lack of new clues, we had to wait a long time for the official announcement of Melissa's death. Consequences and reflections. In May 2022, in the absence of hard evidence that Melissa was alive, the court finally declared her dead. The painful process of liquidating the property to partially compensate investors for their losses began. To Anthony's great regret, his expensive Audi R8 went at auction for half the price. Melissa's other assets, including collections of designer dresses, works of art, luxury goods, and jewelry, suffered the same fate. The proceeds were distributed among the defrauded depositors, but only a fraction was reimbursed. In October 2022, the infamous Dover Heights estate was also put up for sale. Anthony resisted to the last, but a federal court ordered him to get out of the house, which officially belonged to Melissa. At the same time, the man complained that he had only $1.95 left in his account and was completely at the mercy of the management company that handled his wife's frozen assets. Some investors lost their entire retirement savings. Others closed their businesses or sold real estate to follow Melissa's successful path. She lured them with the bright prospects of getting rich quick and living the luxurious life she demonstrated. These people believed her sweet promises and paid bitterly for it. Anthony himself also suffered reputational losses. Although he claimed that he was unaware of his wife's fraudulent schemes and considered all her wealth legitimate, investigators questioned his sincerity. Suspicions were also raised by the delay in reporting Melissa's disappearance. Was Anthony hiding something? So far, it remains a mystery. But after all this story, Anthony's career as a musician took off. The man even dedicated an entire album to Melissa's mysterious disappearance. In the lyrics, he portrays his wife as an innocent victim and the searches in their home as illegal. However, the quality of the lyrics is rather questionable. For example, one line threatens to turn his wife's head into spaghetti if she is touched, whatever that means. In general, the story of Melissa Caddick, who built her own financial empire on lies, still leaves more questions than answers. What happened to the disappeared swindler? Did a wave of remorse finally overwhelm her and push her to take the fatal step? Or maybe it was one of the deceived clients who decided to take revenge for their losses. Or is Melissa still living somewhere under an assumed name, enjoying her stolen millions? Melissa has been the subject of many podcasts and even a miniseries, but the truth seems to remain forever at the bottom of the ocean. However, the fate of the swindler is a warning to anyone who is willing to commit a crime for the sake of money and power. Greed and deceit eventually backfire on the fraudsters themselves, and punishment catches up with even the most cunning. And if someone is tempted by the thought of easy money, remember the sad story of Melissa. After all, you have to pay for everything in life.